in the New England village where I was born quite a few years ago. The long winter evenings about the open fire, or in colder weather around the kitchen stove, were filled with a number of pleasant occupations. First, there was the general care and upkeep of guns, fishing tackle, and associated equipment. Chores done, there were chestnuts, apples, and sweet potatoes for roasting, popping corn and parching corn, checkerberries, walnuts, and butternuts, cider. All these were part of the regular harvest of the countryside, and so were taken for granted, like the logs in the fireplace and one's parents. There was one thing, however, which retained at all times such a halo of mystery and enchantment that it never came to be taken for granted. This was the cigar box of old copper cents, which my father kept locked up in the grandfather's sea chest, along with certain papers, some old spoons and jewelry, and other trinkets. On evenings when he was feeling especially well disposed, the kitchen lamp would be meticulously trimmed, the red kitchen tablecloth would be cleared of debris and brushed, then out would come the magnifying glass, 4 or 5 well-thumbed coin books, and the cigar box with the big cents. There were about 100 of these old coppers, along with a handful or two of other numismatic miscellanies, mostly early American gold and silver pieces. The latter would always be looked at in passing. They had their interest, but the real objective was to study and try to make out the big cents. We wanted to learn about those cents, but encountered difficulties, which at the time were insuperable. We knew each individual coin fairly well, recognized it readily, knew its date, if it could be made out, its color and external physical characteristics, and could in most instances describe from memory the various insults and injuries, the nicks, bruises, cuts and dents, scratches, file marks, acid burns, and corrosion pits that it bore. Also, we tried by poring through the few cent books that could be found, and by diligent comparative study of the cents themselves, to determine the die variety of each of them. The books revealed that in 1793, for instance, which was the first year in which cents were coined, 3 main types and some 20 varieties were struck. For that year, 1793, we had an excellent book, Crosby, and also for 1794, Frossard Hayes. But it soon became clear that dependable information on the old cents beyond the first 2 years was not to be had. There seemed to be no way in which we, by our own effort, could discover the die variety, the rarity, and the value of such cents as were to be found in that old cigar box. Possibly the fascination of the task lay to no small extent in the difficulties encountered. At any rate, now that I have achieved a neighborly acquaintanceship with old age, and meantime have written other, less soul-satisfying books, I'm no longer able to summon up a good reason for not requisitioning the necessary time and materials to write a book aimed at helping a younger generation of kitchen table scientists on Friday nights to make out the big cents. The charm of the old copper cents. One of the remarkable features of American life has been the sustained and almost universal affection shown for the humble copper cent. When the mint started operations in 1793, cents were the first United States coins struck for circulation. This was at the Old Mint building on 7th Street in Philadelphia, and cents have been issued every year since, except during 1815, when an acute scarcity of copper resulted from the Second War with England. No other coin was issued with comparable regularity during the early years of the nation. But it is necessary to look beyond mere occurrence of dates to account for the traditional vogue and charm of the old coppers. At least 3 other factors must have contributed. First, a relatively great number of cents found their way into circulation. Almost everybody could afford to keep a few, especially bright new ones. Being too big to swallow, they were safe as well as frugal gifts for infants and young children, and so they have been among the first familiar memories of childhood. Hundreds of thousands of them have been hidden away and forgotten, to be rediscovered and resurrected by rummaging offspring or descendants. Even now, occasional new discoveries of early cents enter the arteries of numismatic distribution. Viewed as a numismatic commodity, cents of early date are sufficiently numerous to have prevented any individual or group from being able to corner the market and control prices. Early coppers have long been looked upon by coin dealers as the bellwethers of the market, and for a century and a half now, they have been the backbone of American numismatics. They are less influenced by depressions and booms than are other coins, are less subject to speculative buying, and in the lower grades of condition, at least, can be obtained in decent numbers by people of slender means. For generations, American schoolboys bought, sold, swapped, or swiped old coppers. Some of these boys, especially in old age, have returned to the early enchantment, there to forget or condone the singular incompatibility between human dreams and fulfillments. Second, the early coppers are rich in die varieties, cracked dies, imperfect and unusual planchets, misstruck coins, and other minor variations. If one possesses even a rudimentary flair for classification, these coins present a challenge which easily become a fascination. Among the cents from 1793 through 1803, the first 11 years of the series, 301 different true varieties are known. That is to say, coins of these dates are in existence which were struck from 301 different pairs or combinations of obverse and reverse dies. Dates mean but little to the advanced student of cents. It is the die variety that largely determines the rarity and value of the coin. In the early days at the mint, the dies were all cut by hand, and a good deal of the personality of the die cutter was likely to find its way into the new die. Moreover, the method for hardening steel then was ineffective. The new die soon cracked, sometimes in many places, and the resulting coins showed these cracks as ridges, irregular lines, and extra masses of metal on their surfaces. Often coins are found with cracks on both obverse and reverse. both dies were cracked. Die-cracked variations are not counted as different die varieties, but they are of great interest to collectors who sometimes are able, by means of them, to trace the history of a die from the first few coins struck by it through the whole progression of increasingly severe breaks until at last it shattered and broke down altogether. Specialists on early scents have a keen eye for die breaks and have made great use of them in establishing, among other things, the probable order of issue of the known varieties of a date. Thus, what the lovers of old coins like to call a science of numismatics is gradually built up. Old copper, like beauty, appears to possess a certain intrinsic quality or charm, which for many people is irresistible. An experienced dealer in American numismatic materials recently wrote as follows: "Sooner or later, if a collector stays at the business long enough, it is 3-to-1. His interest in all the other series will flag, and he will focus his attention on the early scents." Gold, silver, and even bronze appear to be very much the same wherever you see them. Coins made of these metals become old money and interesting, like the stuff seen in museums. But copper seems to possess an almost living warmth and a personality not encountered in any other metal. The big cent is something more than old money. Look at a handful of the cents dated before 1815, when they contained relatively pure copper. You see rich shades of green, red, brown, yellow, and even deep ebony. Together with blendings of these not elsewhere matched in nature, save perhaps in autumn leaves. If the light is good, direct sunlight is preferable, you will possibly observe that no two of the coins are of quite the same color. Copper oxidizes differently in different atmospheres, and the way it colors and weathers depends also upon the impurities and traces of other metals which it may contain. The copper that went into the early scents must have been of highly variable assay, recruited as it was from almost every possible source. Some came from Sweden, some from England, some was obtained by melting up copper nails, spikes, and copper finishings from wrecked ships, including both British and American men of war. Some of it came from kitchen and other household utensils donated or sold to the mint in response to urgent appeals. George Washington is said to have donated an excellent copper tea kettle, as well as 2 pairs of tongs, early in 1793 for the first cents. It's not surprising, therefore, that to some extent the different early die varieties are recognizable by characteristic color and surface texture, as well as by die breaks, peculiarities of the planchets, and so on. Every early scent has a character of its own. These 3 factors, plentifulness of coins, nearly inexhaustible variation both in number and in condition of the dies, and the intrinsic beauty and variability of old copper, account in part at least for the unique regard in which early copper scents have been held.